The morning they unlocked that door and handed me a plastic bag with my belongings, I stood on the steps of the Decatur Correctional Center and didn't move for a full minute. 63 years old, 7 years gone. The September air smelled like cut grass and diesel from the highway, and I just stood there breathing it in like I'd forgotten what outside felt like. I had $412 in my wallet, what I'd saved from the facility's laundry program, 50 cents an hour for 7 years, a change of clothes, and a bus ticket the state of Georgia had printed for me that morning. That was everything. That was my new beginning. My daughter had stopped visiting after the second year. My son-in-law had made sure of that. I'd learned not to think about it. The bus ride to Savannah took 4 hours. I sat by the window and watched Georgia roll past, the kudzu eating the highway signs, the Baptist churches every 3 miles, the roadside fireworks stands that were somehow always open, and I kept thinking about one thing. Not where I would sleep that night, not how I would stretch $400 into rent money. I thought about my husband Leonard's grave. He'd been buried while I was in county lockup waiting for trial, and I had never once been allowed to stand over the place where they put him. 7 years and I'd never said goodbye. That was the first thing I was going to do. Before anything else. Leonard Marsh, 59 years old when he died. We'd been married 31 years. They said I killed him. I had been convicted of second-degree murder based on what the prosecutor called a pattern of domestic control, his words, and the testimony of our son-in-law, a man named Philip Cord, who told the court he had personally witnessed me threaten Leonard's life 3 weeks before his death. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I heard the verdict, and I felt my legs go out from under me. I screamed that I hadn't done it. Nobody in that courtroom cared. 7 years in a Georgia state prison for the death of the only man I had ever loved. The bus dropped me at the Savannah Greyhound Terminal on Oglethorpe. I had nowhere to stay that first night, so I went to the Salvation Army on Anderson Street, which I knew about because one of the women in my cell block had given me a handwritten list of resources when I walked out. God bless her for that. They gave me a meal, chicken noodle soup, and white bread, and 8 hours of sleep I didn't fully get because the woman in the next cot cried through most of the night. I understood. I'd done the same thing plenty of times. By 9 the next morning, I was on a city bus heading to Bonaventure Cemetery. I'd looked up the address the night before on a donated computer in the Salvation Army's resource room. Leonard was in Section F, they told me when I called. A volunteer buried him when no next of kin could be reached. Our daughter Teresa had apparently claimed she couldn't afford the arrangements. I didn't let myself feel that right away. I tucked it away and kept moving. Bonaventure is one of those old southern cemeteries that looks like it was built to be beautiful. Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks. The Wilmington River glinting through the trees at the far end. Angels and crosses and urns carved from Georgia marble going gray with age. I'd driven past it 100 times when Leonard and I lived on the east side. I'd never imagined I'd be coming here like this. The groundskeeper's office was a small wooden building near the main gate. The man inside, a heavy-set fellow about 40 with a kind face and a Georgia Bulldog's cap, gave me a hand-drawn map to Section F without asking any questions. I appreciated that. I was still wearing the cheap jeans and the gray sweatshirt the facility had given me, and I had no illusions about what I looked like. I found Leonard's marker on my own. A simple flat stone, granite, with his name and dates. Leonard Ray Marsh. Beloved father. Not beloved husband. Someone had decided that. I didn't know who. I knelt down and pulled some weeds that had come up around the base of the stone. The grass was dry and the September sun was already warm on my back. I'd brought no flowers. I hadn't thought of it and couldn't afford them anyway, so I just put my hand flat on the warm granite and I talked to him. I told him I was sorry I hadn't been there. I told him I was going to find out the truth. I had believed for 7 years that someone had killed my husband and blamed me for it. I didn't know who. I didn't know why. But I hadn't spent 7 years thinking about much else. I was so deep in my own thoughts that I almost missed her. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, was crouched behind the neighboring monument, a tall obelisk about 6 feet away, watching me with enormous brown eyes. She had 2 braids, a yellow dress with a grass stain on the knee, and the absolutely serious expression that small children get when they are studying something they don't understand. "Hello there," I said softly. She didn't run. She stood up slowly, one hand still on the stone she'd been hiding behind. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is June," I said. "This is my husband's grave. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Addie." "That's a pretty name. Where are your parents, Addie?" She pointed back toward the groundskeeper's office. "My grandpa works here. I come with him on Saturdays." I smiled. "That sounds like a good job for a Saturday." She took 2 steps closer and looked at Leonard Stone. "Did you know him?" "For a very long time," I said. Addie tilted her head. She had the kind of face that thought out loud. "My grandpa knows everybody here," she said. "He knows all the stories." "I'll bet he does." She took another step. She was looking at me with something I could only call determination. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she said, "but Grandpa says if they're being kind and not trying to take you anywhere, they're probably okay." "Your grandpa sounds like a wise man." "He is." She sat down cross-legged in the grass, which told me she decided I passed the test. "He told me something about this one," she said, pointing at Leonard Stone. My heart slowed down. "What did he tell you?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Addie pulled at a blade of grass. "He said some men came here at night time, that they weren't supposed to be here." She looked up at me. "Grandpa was upset about it. He told my mom when he thought I was asleep." She lowered her voice. "But I wasn't asleep." I sat down in the grass too, so I was at her level. "When was this, do you know?" She thought about it carefully. "Before my birthday." "My birthday is in May. So maybe last winter sometime." "Grandpa said there were 2 men and a truck, and they were at this grave for a long time." She pointed straight at Leonard's marker. "This one. I know it because Grandpa described the flat stone and there's only one flat one on this whole row. I checked." She said that last part with considerable pride. My mind was moving very fast, but I kept very still on the outside. "Did your grandpa call the police?" Addie shook her head. "He said they told him it was a family matter and they gave him some money and he should go back inside." Her expression shifted, a child's uncomplicated disapproval. "Grandpa felt bad about it afterward. He said he shouldn't have taken the money. He told Mama that he thinks about it." I reached into my bag and found the pack of peppermint candies I'd bought at the bus station. I held one out. She took it with a solemn thank you and unwrapped it with great concentration. "Addie," I said carefully, "do you think your grandpa would talk to me?" She considered this. "You could ask him," she said. "He's nice. Just don't tell him I told you about the men. He'll worry." "I won't say a word about you, I promise." Her name, as it turned out, was short for Adelaide. Her grandfather was a man called Roy Sims, 67 years old, a retired letter carrier who'd taken the groundskeeper position 4 years ago because, as he told me later, it was quiet and he liked being outdoors. He was sitting on a camp stool outside the office eating a sandwich when Addie led me back to him by the hand and announced simply, "Grandpa, this lady wants to ask you something." Roy Sims had white hair, brown skin weathered by decades of Georgia sun, and eyes that read people fast. He read me, and I could see him settle. He offered me half his sandwich. I thanked him and declined. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me what Addie had overheard, and then he told me more. Two men had come to the cemetery on a Tuesday night in January 7 months prior. They drove a black pickup with South Carolina plates. They told him they needed to access Leonard Marsh's grave site to retrieve a document that had been buried with the deceased, a signed deed to a piece of property that the family needed for an estate matter. They said it was an unusual situation but entirely legal, and they had brought cash to cover any inconvenience. He'd taken $500 and gone back inside his office and not come out for 2 hours. "I've thought about it many times since," Roy said, his voice low. "I shouldn't have done it. But they seemed like businessmen, not criminals." "What did they look like?" "One was younger, maybe mid-40s, slim, wore a sport coat. The other one was older, heavier. He had a ring on his right hand, big silver thing. He's the one who did the talking. And they said a document had been buried with my husband." Roy looked at me steadily. "I didn't know who you were then," he said. "I'm sorry." "A document buried with Leonard." I turned that over on the bus ride back to the shelter. Leonard had been a contract accountant for most of our married life. He worked for small businesses, mostly doing their books on a freelance basis. In the last 2 years of his life, he'd taken on one large client, a real estate development company called Cord and Associates, based in Savannah, run by our son-in-law Philip. I had never understood why Philip had hired Leonard. They had not gotten along. Leonard had told me in the last months of his life that he was worried about what he was finding in Cord and Associates books, that the numbers didn't add up, that money was moving in patterns he couldn't explain. He said he'd mentioned it to Philip, and Philip had told him to mind his own work and send his invoices. 3 weeks later, Leonard was found dead in our kitchen from what appeared to be a lethal dose of his own heart medication, digoxin toxicity. The medical examiner said the level in his blood was 4 times what his prescription called for. Philip told investigators he had personally seen me arguing with Leonard about his medication the week before, that I had threatened to put him out of his misery during a fight about money. There was no recording, no other witness, just Philip's testimony and 7 years of my life. I had never been able to prove what I believed, that Philip had killed Leonard because Leonard had found something in those books. I had tried to tell my public defender. She was a young woman with too many cases and not enough time, and she believed, I think, that I was in denial. Now someone had come to dig through my husband's grave. The next 3 days I spent carefully. I found a rooming house on Price Street that rented weekly, $220 for a small room with a shared bath, which left me nearly nothing. I signed up for food stamps, which took 2 visits to the DFCS office and most of one day. I found a senior employment resource center on Drayton Street that helped people my age find work, and they placed me 4 days later answering phones part-time at a veterinary clinic. $11 an hour, 3 mornings a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a start. Between shifts, I went to the public library on Bull Street and sat at one of the public computers for hours at a time. Cord and Associates had been audited by the state of Georgia 18 months ago. I found that in the Savannah Morning News Archive, a brief article, 3 paragraphs, saying only that a routine examination of the company's financial records had been conducted following a complaint from a former contractor. The outcome of the audit was not reported. The company was still operating. Philip Cord was still listed as president. I found something else. 2 years before Leonard died, Cord and Associates had been part of a federal land deal, a development project on a parcel of protected coastal marsh that had been controversially rezoned by the county. 3 county commissioners had approved the rezoning. All 3 had retired within a year. One had bought a home in Hilton Head. Another had moved to Florida. The third had died, cardiac event, age 58. The federal land deal had netted Cord and Associates approximately $14 million in development contracts. I sat back from that computer screen and breathed for a minute. If Leonard had found evidence of how that rezoning was purchased, payments to commissioners, falsified records, something that could be traced, it would have been worth killing him for. And if Leonard had been careful enough, smart enough to make copies of what he'd found and put them somewhere safe, somewhere Philip wouldn't think to look, like a document buried with his body. I needed to talk to someone who understood financial crimes. I didn't know any lawyers who would work for free, but I remembered a name from a news article I'd read during my research. A woman named Cora Birch, a retired IRS investigator who had started a small nonprofit in Savannah that helped wrongfully convicted people navigate the legal system after release. The article was 2 years old, but the organization was still listed as active. I found Cora Birch's number in the nonprofit directory. She answered on the second ring. I explained who I was. There was a brief silence. "June Marsh," she said. "I know your case. I looked at it when you were convicted. I thought the prosecution's evidence was thin." I gripped the phone hard. In 7 years, no one outside prison walls had said that to me. We met the following afternoon at a coffee shop on Bruton Street. A busy place, bright, the kind where you can sit for 2 hours and no one bothers you. Cora Birch was 60, compact and sharp-faced, with short silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She'd brought a legal pad. She took notes while I talked for 45 minutes without stopping. When I finished, she tapped her pen on the pad. "If Leonard buried documents in that casket," she said, "and if those documents were retrieved by someone connected to Philip Cord, then we have a problem. The evidence may be gone." She paused. "But evidence that evidence existed is still evidence. Roy Sims saw those men. Those men came for something specific. A court can hear that." "But why would Leonard have buried documents in his own casket?" I asked. "He didn't know he was going to die." Cora looked at me. "Did he have a will?" "Yes. We made them together. Our attorney drew them up about 5 years before he died." "And the attorney was?" "A man named Herbert Glass. He has an office on Habersham Street. He's retired now, I think." "I'll find him," Cora said. "Was there anything unusual in the will? Any specific instructions about burial, about personal effects, about sealed documents?" I started to say no, and then I stopped. "There was a sealed envelope," I said slowly. "Leonard added it to the will file about 6 months before he died. He told me it was a personal letter he wanted included with his burial. I didn't ask what was in it. I thought it was a letter to Teresa. He and our daughter had been having difficulties. I felt something tighten in my chest. I never saw it again. When he died, I was arrested 2 days later. I never had access to any of his papers." Cora wrote something down. "So there may well have been a sealed document deposited with the funeral home. Something Leonard arranged deliberately. Something he knew might be needed one day." She looked up. "He was protecting evidence." "He was protecting me?" I said, and I had to stop talking for a moment. The next 2 weeks were the most frightening and also the most purposeful of my life outside of raising my daughter. Cora found Herbert Glass in a retirement community in Skidaway Island. He was 81 and used a walker, but his memory was precise. He confirmed that Leonard had deposited a sealed envelope with a law firm 6 months before his death, with instructions that it be included in the burial if Leonard died before he had a chance to act on its contents. He had no copy of what was inside. It had been sealed, but he had a notarized receipt for the deposit and a record of its transfer to the funeral home. He gave Cora a certified copy without hesitation. "I always thought there was something wrong about that case," Herbert Glass said, sitting in the sunroom of his retirement apartment with his hands folded. "Leonard was one of the most careful men I ever knew. He didn't do things without reasons." The funeral home, Baxter & Sons on Waters Avenue, had records of everything that went into Leonard's casket. The sealed envelope was documented. It had been placed inside per the family's instructions, and it was no longer in the casket. The current director, A careful young man who had inherited the business from his father turned pale when Cora explained what we were asking about. He pulled the file himself. He found the documentation. He confirmed that 4 months ago, 2 men had come with a notarized authorization signed by next of kin, signed by Teresa Cord, authorizing the removal of a sealed personal document from the interment. I sat in that office and felt something cold move through me. My daughter had signed the paper. I didn't let myself think about what that meant for 3 days. I kept working. I kept moving. I answered phones at the veterinary clinic and fed myself on food stamps and gas station coffee. And I kept moving because if I stopped, I was going to fall apart in a way I might not recover from. On the 3rd day, Cora called me. "I found one of the men," she said. "The older one, the one with the ring. His name is Walter Pruitt. He's a private contractor, does work for several law firms in the area, the kind of work that doesn't get filed publicly. He's done work for Cord & Associates 3 times in the past 5 years. I have the billing records." "And the other man?" "Still working on it. But June, I think we have enough to go to the district attorney's office. What we have is this: a document Leonard deliberately preserved and arranged to protect. A removal of that document orchestrated by your son-in-law's company, authorized by your daughter, carried out by a man with documented ties to Philip Cord, combined with the original financial irregularities Leonard was investigating and the suspicious timing of his death." She paused. "This is circumstantial, but it's a chain, and chains can hold weight in court." "Will they listen to me?" I asked. "I'm a convicted felon walking out of prison with $400. Will anyone in that DA's office take me seriously?" Cora was quiet for a moment. "They'll take the documents seriously," she said. "And I know someone in that office, a senior investigator who has been watching Cord & Associates for 2 years because of that coastal land deal. He has been waiting for something he could move on. His name was Agent Derek Sims, and he met with us 10 days later in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was younger than I expected. Late 30s, quiet, methodical. He listened to everything without interrupting. He asked precise questions. At the end of 90 minutes, he closed his folder and said, 'Mrs. Marsh, we've been building a case against Philip Cord for 2 years. What you've brought us is the piece we were missing.' What followed happened both faster and slower than I expected, the way things do in real life. The federal investigation moved quietly for 3 months. Cora kept me informed as much as she could. I kept my job at the veterinary clinic. I moved from the rooming house to a small studio apartment on Gwinnett Street, $40 a month, when the clinic offered me additional hours. I bought a second-hand bicycle to get around. I learned to cook rice and beans on a 2-burner hot plate and discovered I was better at it than I'd been at cooking on a full stove. Small things. The scaffolding of a new life. In February, federal agents arrested Philip Cord at his office on Drayton Street. The charges included wire fraud, obstruction of justice, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy in connection with the death of Leonard Ray Marsh. The arrest was quiet. No press outside, no spectacle, but it was real. Teresa called me that same evening. It was the first time she had called me in 5 years. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Mama," she said, and then she couldn't say anything else for a long time. I won't describe everything that was in that conversation. Some things are too private for telling. But I will say this. My daughter had not known what her husband was when she married him. She had learned, gradually, over years. By the time she knew enough to understand that he might have been involved in her father's death, she was afraid. She had been made to believe, by him, carefully and over a long time, that any move she made would destroy her. The paper she signed for the funeral home, she told me, she had signed without understanding what it was. He had told her it was a release of Leonard's personal effects to the family. I believe her. I have chosen to believe her. That choice has cost me something and also given me something. I'm still figuring out which is larger. The petition for post-conviction relief was filed in March by an attorney Cora's organization brought in, a woman named Abigail Shaw who specialized in wrongful conviction cases and who took mine pro bono after reading the file. She was thorough and relentless in the way that certain lawyers are when they have decided a case matters to them personally. The hearing was in May, in the same Chatham County courthouse where I had been convicted 7 years before. I sat at the defense table in a blue dress I had bought at Goodwill for $12, and I watched the judge read through the motion and the supporting documents for what felt like a very long time. He granted the petition. The conviction was vacated. The case was dismissed. I walked out of that courthouse into the May sunshine with Cora on one side of me and Abigail Shaw on the other, and the courthouse steps felt different under my feet than they had the last time I descended them. The state of Georgia does not have a statute providing compensation for wrongful conviction. That fact sits poorly with me, and I have said so publicly on several occasions since. There was a civil suit which settled out of court 8 months later for an amount I am not permitted to disclose, but which has allowed me to stop worrying about rent. Philip Cord was convicted on all charges in November of that year. He is currently serving 22 years in federal prison. His attorneys are appealing. They will lose. I went back to Bonaventure Cemetery on the 1-year anniversary of my release. I brought white chrysanthemums this time. Leonard had always liked them, and I spent an hour with him. The September light came through the live oaks the way it does in the late afternoon, gold and slow, and the Wilmington River glinted at the end of the long alley of graves, and I talked to my husband about all of it. I told him I was sorry it took so long. I told him what he had done. The sealed envelope, the careful arrangement, the quiet protection of the truth had saved me. Even from inside a coffin, Leonard Marsh had looked after me. I found Addie near the groundskeeper's shed, taller than I remembered and missing 2 front teeth. She recognized me immediately. She ran across the grass in her sneakers and crashed into me at knee height. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," I said. She squinted up at me. "Did everything work out?" "It did," I said. She nodded, fully satisfied, and ran back to show Roy Sims the grasshopper she had caught in a paper cup. Roy walked over and shook my hand. "I'm glad you came back," he said. "I worried about you." "You helped me," I told him. "You and Addie both." He looked a little embarrassed. "I should have called the police that night." "Yes," I said, "but you told the truth when it mattered. That's what counted." I work now with Cora Birch's organization. I came on as a staff advocate 6 months ago, helping people navigate the first weeks after release. The food stamps application, the housing list, the bus routes, the free legal clinics and the employment centers and the places that won't look at your record, the things nobody tells you about and that you have to learn by failing first. I know all of it now. I can help with all of it. Last month, a woman came to us who had been inside for 11 years for a crime she said she didn't commit. She sat in the plastic chair across from my desk and she looked exactly the way I must have looked when I walked out of Decatur, hollowed out and frightened and holding herself very carefully together. The way you learn to do when falling apart is not an option. I pushed the intake form across the desk and I told her my name and I said, "Tell me everything from the beginning and we have as much time as you need." Because everybody who has been wronged deserves someone willing to sit down and listen. And sometimes sitting down and listening is exactly how the truth finally finds its way out into the light. I think about Leonard a lot when I'm sitting across from someone new at the intake desk. The way he quietly arranged for the truth to survive him. Not loudly, not with accusations, just a sealed envelope placed carefully with a man he trusted. That was the most Leonard thing he ever did. He was always like that, steady, patient, willing to do the right thing even when no one was watching. What destroyed Philip in the end wasn't a dramatic confrontation or some piece of luck. It was the accumulation of his own choices, each one stacked on top of the last. He lied on the witness stand. He sent men to a cemetery in the middle of the night. He had my daughter sign a paper she didn't understand. Every single one of those decisions left a mark somewhere, a record, a receipt, a witness who remembered a silver ring on a man's right hand. Evil that is careful still leaves fingerprints. It always does. I have come to believe that completely. And I think about what it took to get to the truth. Not just from me, but from everyone involved. Roy Sims had to find the courage to tell me what he'd seen, even though accepting that money had shamed him. Herbert Glass, 81 years old and walking with a cane, had to sit in that sunroom and trust that what he knew still mattered. Cara Birch had to look at a woman who walked in off the street with nothing, no money, no credibility, no proof yet, and decide she was worth listening to. None of them were obligated, all of them chose. That is what I come back to most, the choosing. 7 years in a Georgia prison will do something to a person's sense of what they can control. You learn, slowly and painfully, that you cannot control very much. You cannot control the jury. You cannot control the jury. You cannot control what people believe about you. You cannot control how long the truth takes to surface. What you can control is whether you keep thinking clearly, whether you keep asking questions, whether you stay honest about what you know and what you don't know and what you still need to find out. I held on to that when I had nothing else. It wasn't courage in any grand sense. It was more like stubbornness with a purpose. And then there was my daughter. I chose to believe her. I want to be honest about how hard that was, because I think pretending it was easy would be a disservice to anyone who has faced something similar. Believing her required me to look at the situation from every angle, to separate what I felt from what the evidence actually showed, to ask myself what a fair person would conclude. It required me to use my head even when my heart was in pieces. That discipline, the willingness to think carefully when thinking clearly, is the last thing you want to do. That may be the hardest thing I know how to do. And it saved us both. What I tell people now when they sit in that plastic chair across from my desk and they look like the world has used them up is this: the truth is not magic. It does not arrive on its own. Someone has to want it badly enough to go looking, and then keep looking when the looking is hard, and then be honest enough to follow wherever it leads even when the destination is painful. That is the work. That is always the work. Leonard knew that. He did his part quietly from the beginning and trusted that someone would eventually do theirs. I try to be worthy of that trust every single day.